lives in Hollywood, California. Everybody has fish. My way was stupid mad weed thinking about aliens. How about that? Smoking mad weed, hanging out with this chimp. Yeah, chimp. You know that? Bedtime for bombs of myth. Movie with hanging out with this chimp, getting high, thinking about UFOs. Good night. You can't try too hard, Joe. You're not gonna be able to run away from yourself.
What do you think of Ronaldo?
Mark, thanks for joining us. What is your reaction to the White House's confirmation of 25% tariffs against your country?
Well, look, I think President Trump states that we in Canada will cave in, but we are going to stand up to a bull. We're not going to back down. We're united.
Most everyone else is.
And the effect
You've got eyes.
We
need to get this situation under control ASAP.
Well, ultimately, the steps that the President is taking against Canada, contemplating against Mexico, China, others, and threatening the world are going to the United States. They're going to hit the road.
We lost contact with 3 of our scientists.
Interest rates are going to damage its reputation around the world. Let's be absolutely clear. This is the second time in less than 10 years, less than 8 years, that the United States has been a trade its closest trading partner to the negotiations.
And there's no doubt from your perspective that Mexico, which used to be NAFTA, has been written back.
Well, it's U.S. violence. Let's help the justification, purported justification for these tariffs is the cross-border movement of fentanyl and legal. And just to compare, you will have heard this before, but it bears repeating, that in both cases, if you compare Canada relative to Mexico, the proportions are less than 1%.
Here we go. You gonna give me a gun or a swift kick in the balls?
All driven across the border by terrorists. So the seizure
Jackpot! Who fucking are?
Southern border. And it's a similar number in Mexico. There is no national justification to this. It's the purported justification. Justice is slowly but this is
It's pretty clear that the US president has
I'm range trained to fire pretty much anything.
National trade deficit that's Trump. It's that America's being ripped off. That's mad as hell.
Well, yes, you've just shifted the justification as the president sometimes does. The United States runs a deficit with Canada only because of energy, because of U.S. imports, and as well as electricity. So that runs a deficit versus Canada. That's not being ripped off. In fact, we sell that energy at a discount to world prices in America. So perhaps
it's pretty clear that it thinks your country can be pushed away. And talked about the fact that he wants to be Prime Minister in weeks. What does that look like?
Well, the first thing is we have a lot of cards. We're keeping them close to our chest. We'll start playing these. Those decisions are for the current government. I've been in close contact with our main negotiators, our Foreign Affairs Minister, our Finance Minister, who's been in Washington, our Public Safety Minister has also been down. We will take steps. I think it's reasonable to expect in the immediate term that we will match dollar for dollar the U.S. tariffs. We will target tariffs against those goods and services that are most affected in the United States.
See the face on that thing?
Nightmare fuel. This will have an impact on the Canadian economy, and that impact will be felt more quickly and to a greater extent in the U.S. But Canadians are no concessions. It's entirely unjust. We have other that wanted to
Well, could you imagine, for example, trying to target some circle, perhaps targeting just the energy potash?
We have a deep strategic relationship that's being violated. As I said a moment ago, by the middle of March, is to...
You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some bombshell news here that involves your former office in Washington, D.C. It looks like the acting U.S. attorney in that office, who was installed by Donald Trump, his name is Ed Martin, has just fired a number of prosecutors who worked on cases related to January 6th. In total, it looks like 25 to 30 prosecutors were fired altogether. First off, can I have your reaction to this?
Yeah, 2 words, Brian. Wrongful termination. That's going to be little consolation to the wrongfully terminated prosecutors who now inevitably will very likely bring legal challenges to these terminations. They will be put through hell for the next year or 2. They will probably be vindicated and earn back pay. But this kind of rampant illegality, not to mention some of Donald Trump's unconstitutional...
We're known for the best brisket in Chicago. We work really hard to provide the area with true craft barbecue. Our customers are regulars here because they love the atmosphere. Brisket.
Dominic Leach is the owner and chef at Lexington Betty Smokehouse on Chicago's South Side. She opened in 2019 and, like other restaurateurs in Chicago and across America, has seen firsthand how the surge in inflation over the past 5 years has affected small businesses.
I'll bring it over to you when it's ready, okay? Thank you. Everyone's favorite, our brisket that we're known for. 2 years ago, I was paying $3.80 per pound. Today, I bought brisket for $4.60 per pound, which means we have to sell it at a higher price. Inflation is really affecting the restaurant because we have to spend more money on product, therefore increasing the prices for our customers. It makes it really uncomfortable. You typically have to give people an explanation. Why is brisket by the pound more this week than it was last week? It disappoints people.
The challenges facing Leach play out across America, even as inflation falls from the dramatic highs of 2022. A recent survey found that 24% of small businesses identified inflation as the top problem they face.
One of the things we're doing for years is people really...
What do people our time industry care that the Fed has a 2% target? The impact of inflation is felt more acutely in rural areas where household wealth tends to be lower. With far less disposable income, those earning the least have to dedicate a greater proportion of their income to everyday necessities. That divide is compounded by the fact that wealthier Americans, often found in urban areas, relied on a moving stock market to increase their wealth and offset some of the effects of inflation. Is the experience of inflation different here in your district in the Midwest and to the West than it might be in New York on Wall Street?
I think so. I mean, I think, especially if you go into rural communities, we have a lot of rural areas. The challenges that families are facing are different. I mean, they're all facing different places that virtually all Americans face. But they also have huge challenges. Hospitals are closing in many rural districts because there's not enough population to support those hospitals. In some cases, colleges and universities are closing. It's hard to get home construction built, even though there's a lot of land available. Getting new construction and new development built. The challenges in rural communities are different, but a lot of times they're driven by price as well. So there's some important similarities, but there's some specific differences in rural communities.
For the likes of Neil Kashkari and Austin Wolski, a large part of their districts cover vast rural areas. The big focus of John Williams' jurisdiction is naturally on Wall Street in New York City. Analysts and traders immediately dissect any inflation data, not just looking at the headline number, but peeling back the layers to look at individual contributors. Very wide.
You get the headline number, core number. Literally the next second I look at service. So service versus goods. Then I look at where's shelter. And what has been high, so what's keeping inflation high is not a broad-based higher inflation across. Then I would be a little nervous that are we getting stuck somewhere above 2? It's really a couple of components. It's shelter, lagging, hello, rents coming down. It's just taking a while. People will own their homes. It takes a while for that to show up in the future. So there's a lag. Auto insurance, medical insurance, these are included numbers. That's why I think it's such a good flexibility. Because why should they keep policy high? Just because shelter inflation, because who's paying rent, is running above target. Just because it's adjusting slowly.
For those in the markets every day, like JP Morgan's Priya Misra, communication is a critical part of a Fed president's job. And a clear target, 2%, makes that job a lot easier.
Well, you know, inflation is different in different parts of the country, and it can be different at different times. I think that, you know, where this became easier, unfortunately, was when inflation was high, and everybody said inflation was high everywhere. Inflation was clearly damaging to the economy. It was harmful to families and businesses. Everybody wanted to see inflation lower. I think the communication of the 2% goal was probably powerful during this period because we weren't questioning what should get inflation to, what's the rate. We said absolutely consistent on that. I think people understood that the importance of price stability, the importance of getting inflation back down. I think that was, you know, regardless of all the debates on exactly how to do this, he was a very clear, smart message. It's a message that I'll repeat it over and over that, you know, we're not compromising.
That's not the kind of analysis Americans elsewhere are making. They see inflation in the supermarket, at the pump.
Inflation has moved much closer to our 2% longer run, 2% objective, moving down to 2%, but get back to 2% inflation, our 2% objective. Sustainably down to 2% confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%.
Given how often we hear about that 2% inflation, I think it was just obvious, but it's not. I do think, to the public, there is this question, why can't the price go back to what it was before? Why even have a 2% inflation target? I only get questions about it, even before the pandemic, before the rise of inflation. Why is it 0? Why are we aiming for 0 instead of aiming for 2?
That's what it does. Did you just mark that out of the air?
Over the years, the Fed's 2% target has come under question from those that follow it closely.
They're always saying that it should be too low, and the 2% target is too low. And so if we could stop this disinflation to about 15%, I think that would be a good compromise.
So where did that 2% inflation target come from? For that, we had to go all the way back to 1990 in New Zealand, when Don Brash was the RBNZ governor. New Zealand had had very high inflation said by OECD standards anyway. Double-digit inflation figures through much of the 70s and early 80s. And then the Labour government decided that that would get inflation right down to 1988. Mr. France asked about inflation is different, but like 10% for the first time in some years. So, well, aren't you satisfied now? And the minister said, no, zero inflation or 0 to 1%. Over the next couple of years, they have modified gradually to try to get back to 0% by 1992. And that was the target that I signed up to. The target was 992. And we went to a target at the midpoint of 2%. We could explain to people what we were targeting, who understood the game, and in the early years, particularly of my time as governor, I spent a huge amount of time talking to farmers groups, Rotary clubs, church groups, even groups who listened, making it very clear that we were deadly serious about achieving that target. And from there, it went worldwide.
Inflation returns to our 2% medium-term target. Inflation is now back to the 2% target.
Inflation has been close to our 2% target, and Canada followed suit, with the UK and others. And in early 2012, the U.S. adopted the 2% policy.
The committee judges that inflation at the rate of 2% is most consistent over the longer run with our statutory mandate. Clearly communicating to the public this 2% goal for inflation over the longer run should help foster price stability and moderate long-term interest rates. It will enhance the committee's ability to promote maximum employment in the face of significant economic disturbances.
John Williams, now the Fed president, was in charge of the San Francisco Fed when the policy was adopted. He recalls the inflation was transparency.
When Chair Bernanke came to the Fed, was hired for asking which actually had started Chairman Green's movement toward transparency there. So going back to January 2012, and just
We're coming to bodies by week. Come again.
It was really greater clarity. And we don't want inflation to be too low. We don't want inflation to be too low. And importantly, what's the inflation rate that's consistent with the dual mandate that has, which is relatively unique. Good afternoon.
But the urge to have a clear, transparent inflation goal didn't mean that the goal necessarily had to be the 2% one that other countries had adopted.
With 19 participants in Parliament, there's always a wide range of views. So if you were to ask the question, is 1.5%, 2 or 2.5%, for those right or wrong answers, I think any of those answers would be good. I think 2% is the answer.
Given what other central banks had already done by 2012, Chairman Williams' announcement was but it sparked plenty of debate. And one of the voices initially against the target was the current Chicago Fed President, Austin Goolsbee.
I wasn't into Fed at that time. I was actually critical. Only 0% conveys false sense of precision. Then inflation's a noisy series. And just telling the difference, if I told you how many months of inflation data would it take given the variability of the series?
I don't think Strauss ever figured out how this machine works.
Between a 2.0% inflation rate and 2.2% inflation rate, and the answer is years, if not decades, of data before you would be able to even tell the difference. So that's why I was kind of critical at the time. But that said, I've completely changed my view, and I'm now a strong advocate.
Whatever the pluses and minuses of the Fed's 2% target were when it was adopted over a decade ago, it's now well established. Markets are going to depend on it. The Fed has a 2%
It's extremely tough. So I'll start with that because I'm having that credibility that it is 2% of the time. Because what we do is essentially pricing in an expectation. I mean, risk around an expectation over the time. So now if my inflation is somewhat unexpected, I'm pricing so the bit. So I'm talking about the treasury curve, it continues that treasury curve, inflation part of it, where at real rates. So I think it helps anchor expectations. It also tells us how should the market price in the Fed response to either another policy shock, fiscal policy, or a shock to the economy.
For someone dealing daily with markets like Israel, having a clear target is probably exactly what
Something 2 to 3% is fair. Now the Fed in 2012 picked 2%. But they picked 2. It allows the Fed, if you think the Fed doesn't want to go to negative rates, and look at Europe and Japan, it's not clear the negative rates were down. All these negative externalities. It allows, if inflation is at 2, it allows real rates to go down. Because if the Fed gets to 0, that's a negative 2% real rate. So rates go down. So this 2 to 3% range is important.
As much as the markets rely on that fixed 2% target, does it matter that the Fed doesn't hit it all that often? Since Chair Bernanke announced the target in 2012, it's been within 0.2% of target in only 20 of 155 years. In more recent times, inflation has been stubbornly stuck above the target. After peaking in 2022, core PCE, that's the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, showed signs of progress when it fell to 3% in 2023. But since then, it's largely flatlined, leaving some to speculate about possible upward risks to inflation, given an economy that appears to be running hotter than anticipated, perhaps because of structural changes.
The only reason we talk about inflation is because we compare it to an arbitrary target that I'm willing to bet you would accept.
Next stop, recycle. Extra window closed.
That suggests a change in the inflation target at this point in those markets with a strong reaction.
That a good let's see what part of that that's possible. 3%. How would the market do?
Blood pressure increasing, just simply say it's a Pandora's box, right? You start with, it's just a 50 basis point increase. It's a slippery slope. A year later, maybe it's another 50 basis point. Once you open the door to any increase in the inflation target, I think the market has to price in the risk that could continue to rise. Given where inflation is right now, above target, I think it's disingenuous for the Fed to reach the target. It's like me trying to run a marathon, and then when I realize it's really hard to run that much, I just do it it just doesn't sound credible.
We said the target is 2%. And once you set a target, that is a sacred promise that is never made. And you can't debate it's because you're not hitting the old target. You have to finish your job before you start looking for new jobs.
I would say on inflation, it was under expectation. So why do I think we should take the inflation target for granted? Is because expectations, it would be great if inflation expectations are well understood. Because when you find a business, I think looking for pricing and plan for investments over time, because I know this is where inflation, roughly speaking, on average will be over time. If I'm a household, I can have that same expectation. If I'm an employee, I'm going to ask my employer for a raise, again, I have a sense of where that is.
But for all the benefits of setting expectations for overall inflation with a simple, single goal of 2%, it doesn't mean that everyone will experience the same level of inflation across all socioeconomic groups, industries, or geographic areas. After a sharp ramping up of inflation, those expectations don't return us to the prices we knew 2 years ago. So that is where we turn next. How people are affected.
Here is some of the key data on this page. Some $3.8 trillion worth were imported into the United States. Mexico, China, and Canada, three countries present in 40%. Basically, tariffs are about tackling trade deficits. The US importing more goods than it's been exporting. The deficit in some of its key partners has been widening. In November 24, it operated at a deficit of $5 billion with Canada, $15.3 billion with Mexico, and a massive $24.9 billion with China. Well, earlier I spoke to the acclaimed economist Mohamed El-Arian, president of Queen's College, Cambridge, formerly chair of President Obama's Global Development Council. And I began by asking him what outcomes he thinks President Trump is aiming for.
I think he wants multiple outcomes. That's why he loves the concept so much. First, he wants to use it as a tool to get other countries to do what he wants them to do.
Right.
Secondly, he thinks of it as a tool to raise lots of revenue. And thirdly, he thinks of it as a tool to promote domestic companies.
So if we break them down a little bit, let's just take domestic manufacturing, for example, and encouraging global companies to relocate production to the US. That could take years.
It could, but it will start a process that will bear fruit for the US for years as well. It also will encourage domestic industries that are already there to get an advantage over imports by making imports either more expensive
or less profitable for other countries to send to the US. So it is a big political risk, isn't it? I think the problem with this whole thing is that in the short term, the US is relatively strong cyclically and structurally. So other countries can resist, but they will not resist for long. The challenge is over the longer term, this is going to encourage other countries to reduce their interaction with the US. And then we enter this threat of a global trade. That's the worry. I think what we really are looking for is a fragmentation of the global system. We're looking at more blocks around the world, more axes of convenience, and what we lose is the ability to address other problems. And there are clearly implications here, potential implications for the chance of Rachel Reeves, who has staked her reputation, staked her entire plan. But the good news is that so far, Trump has not mentioned the UK. My hope, and I have no reason for that hope, is that it has time to be BX the threat of terrorism. There always be a threat of terrorism. How so? By offering the US better access in a couple of areas where the US has felt discriminated against. Healthcare, that as privatization of our beloved NHS. We don't go anywhere near the privatization of NHS, but to be clear, we are not involved in this threat of effectiveness. We are involved as far away from that. Everybody's mind outside the US, how do I minimize the damage to an economy that is already struggling? And final thought on whether tariffs to work as an economic instrument. If it's a one-off thing, then in the different countries, it will not accommodate that. If it's what game theory is called, if you repeat this game, if you start having over and over and over again, it will fundamentally change how Harvard owes me a beer with Dr. Alarian, thank you very much indeed for joining us and your insight.
Looks as crazy as I feel. This should work.
The White House says 25% tariffs are going into effect today on goods coming into the U.S. from two of the country's biggest trading partners, also the closest, Mexico and Canada. So what impact will President Trump's move have on American consumers, your wallet, where? ABC senior White House correspondent Selena Wang joins us from Washington with those details.
As led.
Hey, good morning, Janae. Yeah, this could have a huge impact on American consumers. But remember that some of the countries are growing costs for Americans, but these tariffs could have from avocados to but there's like
This up was going to get weird, but not that fucking weird.
Going incendiary.
places for fresh produce, alcohol, electronics, cars, and more. With those tariffs on oil and gas, the Texas got the pump by as much as 70 cents per gallon. I pressed the White House on those higher prices. Can you guarantee that those tariffs will increase prices for Americans? I think Americans who are concerned about increased prices will get with them. Companies and consumers the hardest, and Trump's move to spark a breakthrough. And the minister says they're threatening
getting a herd is good for the Can't argue with science.
Tariffs are everything.
Now we wait for the show.
Yeah, today's sources are telling us that the Trump administration is compiling a list of FBI agents to fire or force out. We're told that the administration is worked on investigations.
Here's to finding more efficient ways to kill shit.
Trusted to carry out President Trump's policy. In response to this news, the FBI Agents Association is calling this outrageous and dangerous. Janae? All right, Selena, thank you for that.
This morning, the Trump administration is planning to implement sweeping tariffs on some of the United States' biggest trading partners. On Friday, President Trump said there's nothing Canada, Mexico, and China can do to stop the
Heads.
You lose. The administration is reshaping the federal government, even before meeting of the president's cabinet. President Trump is spending the weekend in Florida. That's where Willie James.
Good morning to you, Michelle. President Trump is making good promises to levy tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China in a move that could affect billions of dollars in the trade. President Trump's plan to put tariffs on goods from Mexico and China advanced today. Yesterday, Trump's specifications.
Plenty of courses.
America's largest trading partner, Canada.
Extraction is ready when you are.
Max ammo. Said it's pretty good options as well. Immediate response. Expect more tariffs prices on consumers. The president expressed the American people nations.
I got elected for I had almost no inflection.
Meanwhile, some of President Trump's nominees for key positions sat down to tough questions.
We're ready for that still. I mean, really ready.
Roger that. Third headed your way.
Position.
Alex, we're up the LZ or evac authorizing chopper gun with close air.
Jets. Patel for FBI Director. Andrew Gaggard as Director of National Intelligence. I'm certain that Russia
Senator, I'm offended by the question.
And in a memo dated yesterday, the Trump Justice Department moved to fire the prosecutors who are investigating the January 6th Capitol riot in a separate memo given by CBS News and
Welcome back. The administration sweeping tariffs on our three biggest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, set to go into effect tomorrow. I want to bring in David Wesson for analysis. He's Senior Fellow for Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution, someone I've known for a long time. This is Wall Street Report. David Weston bringing you stories of capitalism. This week, a Chinese startup triggered tech sell-off, raising questions about whether the Magnificent Seven can continue to drive the stock market. Plus, the fates of office buildings in New York City. Some are glitzier and have more to offer their tenants than their Class B counterparts. But
they have more in common in the challenges they face than meets the eye.